Ah, damn it. Clyde, pass me the wrench. Command Control.
Command Control presents Hardwire Heartache Synthetic Love Stories, Episode 9, Combat.
Ladies and gentle slime, we are receiving word of an unprecedented special event taking place in the arena tonight.
That's right, Schlemp. Details are emerging as we speak. What we know so far is in just half an hour at Rappy's Arena in beautiful Radiant City, a two-man team of Kalashan assassins are gonna put on an exhibition against two Abominus. A test run, I guess, for an absolutely wild matchup this evening against the current champion of the universe, Senor Machismo.
We are also hearing reports that the whirling death himself, the legendary Kalashan Fixico, is coming out of retirement for one night only to team up with the champ and show the supposed Kalashan what a true killer is all about.
I'll tell you, I got an early look at the two who are claiming to be Kalashan, and one of them looked pretty old and fat, Schlemp.
I'm no expert, Mark, but to my knowledge, Kalashan don't come in plus.
Bjorn reached over and turned off the radio on the desk beside him. His eyes locked on Daphne and Mariko. Grell had been radio silent since he supposedly went to inform the rest of the crew that the Varangian was leaving as soon as the Wraith was finished regenerating. Just then, an incoming transmission pinged his comms.
Bjorn Sigurdsson, your reputation precedes you.
You've gone to great lengths to chase us all the way out here. It's honestly quite impressive. What is it you want exactly?
Straight to the point. I'll return the favor then. You have 3 of my assets on board your ship, and I would like them back.
You're mistaken. 2 of the 3 have already exited my ship, and 1 is being held for trying to destroy us. I owed a favor to someone and was merely repaying it. I don't appreciate being dragged into whatever this is.
Fair enough. We will be recovering the other 2 shortly on our own. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to see your way out of this mess.
I haven't lived this long by simply turning over bargaining chips. I will return the assassin Mariko to you on my return to the Milky Way. We will jettison her into open space as we depart.
A long pause followed as Teruro took his time in replying. As he did so, Rosie silently led Daphne to the transporter pad and typed in the coordinates for the Delusion Casino. Rosie kissed Daphne on the forehead and gave her a big hug before sending her silently off the ship.
Thank you, Rosie. You'll always be in my heart.
That will be acceptable. I expect to hear from you as soon as you make your way back to the Milky Way. And Bjorn, the Wraith might be a formidable ship, but even it isn't impenetrable. Do yourself a favor and keep the heroics to some other fool.
As soon as Teruro hung up, Bjorn opened the away team comms and announced that he had sent Daphne to the casino and would be departing first thing in the morning to return Mariko to the Milky Way as a peace offering to Mizukawa.
For what it's worth, I apologize, but I have to think of my family and my ship before anything else. Best of luck to you, Grell. My debt is repaid.
Daphne stood outside the casino, looking up at Lawless as he kept watching over the door. Even though he towered over the girl, She didn't show any signs of fear.
I'm looking for my daddy and our friends. Let me in.
No squirts allowed.
Just as Lawless denied entry to Daphne, Grell came running toward the entrance and a look of relief came over him, seeing her unharmed. He looked around to see if she had caught any unwanted attention before sheepishly speaking to Lawless.
Forgive my android. I prefer to let her think she isn't mechanical. It contributes to the immersion.
Lawless looked to the child and tilted his head back with a skeptical glance before looking back at Grell. As Grell took Daphne by the shoulders, Lawless's glare turned to a grimace of disgust.
What are you talking about, Uncle Grell? I'm a little girl.
Grell chuckled nervously and scratched at the back of his head as his face turned a shade of pink. He hastily sputtered out a reply and gently shoved Daphne into the casino.
Yeah, just how I like 'em. Come on, robot.
Ew! I'm talking.
Grell clapped his hand over the child's mouth before she could ruin his bluff and hurriedly pushing her along. Lawless's look of disdain only deepened as he watched the two scoot off toward Offenov and Mikey.
I hope you have some deep pockets, pervert. And no diddling in my casino. Do you understand?
As soon as they approached Offenov and Mikey, Daphne bit Grell on the hand and stomped on his foot. Freeing herself from him and running to the safety of Mikey, Grell yelped in pain and tried his best to explain.
Youch! Daphne! I was just bluffing so he would let you in.
Daphne glared at him from behind Mikey and caught notice of Offenov standing beside them. She gave him a suspicious glare from behind her human shield.
You look like a pervert too. Don't mess with me unless you want more of what Uncle Grell's got.
Daphne raised a tiny fist toward Offenov, and he raised an eyebrow before stepping back a pace. Mikey turned and kneeled down to meet Daphne at eye level, giving her a big hug before placing his hands on her shoulders.
Hey, I missed you, kiddo. That guy's name is Offenov, I think. But he's gonna help us get out of here.
So I heard on the radio that there's gonna be a fight or something. Are they talking about Daddy?
Yeah, they are.
Mikey sighed and nodded. As he looked into Daphne's eyes, it was almost as if he was searching for something, and it didn't take long for the young girl to pick up on it. Her face went from relieved to perplexed.
Why are you looking at me like that? You're not gonna start acting weird now too, are you? Where's Papa?
I'm sorry, kiddo. I'm just glad you're safe is all. Your dad already went downstairs to the arena, and we were just about to go to the spectators area. Come on, follow me.
Children are such feral things.
Mikey and crew followed Offenov through the maze of neon-lit rooms, each filled with fantastic-looking creatures engaged in all sorts of gambling and carrying on. Pink smoke wafting from giant hookahs laid out on the tables, tendrils spilling from it in every direction, feeding the narcotic known as pink light to groups of barely conscious partygoers. As they made their way through the spectators' entrance and into the vast seating area of the arena, the roar of the crowd as handlers wrangled two massive beasts on the arena floor below was already almost deafening. and Birx made their way down a long corridor with a bright light at the end, each step leading them closer to the roaring sounds of spectators and the far-off hum of amplified voices announcing the action to the crowd. A long pause hung between them that was eventually broken by Abira's cool and casual tone.
My memories are returning, but I can't control when or which ones. Sometimes they can be a little hard to handle.
Yeah, I kinda figured. Hopefully you unlock the part where you're an unstoppable badass that's gonna get us out of this mess.
Daniel, I'm trying to tell you, I might not be focused on this fight. I was right to be afraid of remembering. Sometimes I will remember something and it just sucks me in. The life I have endured, Daniel, I wish I could start over and forget how terrible it's been.
Birx paused and looked her over for a moment. She was, for all intents and purposes, a superhero compared to him. But as she stood there, hugging herself tightly, a strum of something one might compare to sympathy ran across Birx's heartstrings. For the first time, he allowed himself to see her fear and vulnerability as more than a deception tactic or deliberate part of her design. If Grell was right and her mind really was so close to humans, Birx had figured that she was probably terrified.
This is gonna end at some point. We're gonna win. Not just this fight, but against Mizukawa, Mariko, and anyone else who stands in the way of us getting on with our fucking lives. When we do that, you don't have to be the person you used to be anymore. You can focus all your energy on finding out who you want to be, and we can all live free and rest easy for a while.
Abira at first shook the words from her head as if they were impossible. The words of Afanav,
So you're a free AI.
replayed in her head. Her face curled into a bitter frown at the utter parody of being called free when her only choices have ever been to comply or death. The idea of actually being able to breathe for once was almost as terrifying as the alternative.
All the harsh shit you are remembering is gonna pale in comparison to what we gotta do to get through. You might even churn up some fresh trauma to deal with, but it'll be easier to deal with when you're surrounded by friends and not getting chased by psychopaths. I'm ready to put it all on the line for that future. So are you with me?
The question rang in Abira's ears as a strange new sense of purpose burned in her chest. Maybe it was Birx's own conviction that made her feel this way. Or maybe the vision of finally being able to live her life in peace was the motivator. Whatever the case, her eyes flashed as she nodded once and cracked her knuckles with renewed intensity and purpose.
I'm done playing. Let's tear a hole in these fuckers.
Protein and Protozoa. Tonight, a group of unknown people claiming to be of Kalashan origin appeared in Radiant City with a single purpose in mind: to show without a shadow of a doubt that there are no finer warriors in the known universe.
That's the story we've been told, at least. We already know the Kalashan are an extremely rare breed. In fact, we've only ever seen one. We all know that's the undefeated champion in retirement, Fixico.
Yes, indeed. And the retired champion himself has decided to come out of retirement at the age of 92 to face the supposed Kalashan, but not before they prove themselves here and now against two abominas, both feline.
1,500 pounds apiece of humanoid feline.
Abira and Birx entered a small bullpit with a small eye-level view onto the huge arena, and were promptly stopped by a grizzled old half-man, half-warthog with one dead eye and enough scars to fill a constellation map. He looked them up and down, and his glistening pink snout sniffed the air as if taking them in.
So, you're the supposed Kalashan, eh? Where's your promoter?
As soon as the pig man asked for their promoter, Afanav appeared behind them, out of breath and carrying a bunch of neatly folded sand-gray clothing that nearly matched the arena floor perfectly. Set on top were a couple of sets of laser-throwing knives, smoke bombs, silk ropes and sickle-like hand weapons.
Terribly sorry, young late. These got caught up in customs, and we had to borrow some civilian effects. Here are your traditional Kalashan effects, Koa and Ashika.
The pigman looked skeptically at the weapons as he snatched them and inspected each and every one with a level of attention to detail that Birx even found genuinely impressive. He snorted his satisfaction that the weapons were clean and began to recite the rules of the contest.
This is a no-holds-barred melee competition. 2 versus 2. You're responsible for your own lives out there. If you shoot the white flags, which would be provided to both you and your promoter, the fight stops and you live. But since you're Kalashan, you won't be needing them.
The pigman grinned, and as his keen eye watched the two of them and motioned for them to strip. Before they could protest, he pointed to a sign about 100 different languages that basically said, all fighters must submit to physical inspection before every fight. Reluctantly, they began stripping from their clothing. Blasters and handcuffs revealed Birx had more than a few options on him at all times, and Abira had only to unzip the jumpsuit she had acquired at the Rust City Circus, and it fell to the floor. The pigman snorted a bit as he slowly began circling the two.
You're allowed to choose from any of the weapons in the bull pit, as well as the ones you arrived with. Aside from the firearms, of course. The Abominus won't hesitate to kill you. I suggest you return the favor.
The pigman's good eye squinted as he took in Birx with radiating intensity. A Kalashan wasn't above using blasters in a pinch, but most Kalashan viewed them as cowards' weapons. That, paired with Birx's physical shape, had the grizzled veteran more than a bit suspicious. After a long pause, he snorted.
I'll watch you get dressed and pick your weapons, then send a call up to the box when you're ready.
Abira dressed quickly in the ninja-like garb. She had become accustomed to these kinds of garments, having been trained by Mizukawa and his assassins. But Birx was hopelessly swimming in the sand-colored fabric. Abira finished tying the silk robe around her body in order to tie back the sleeves and pant cuffs of the garments, and then moved to help Birx. She also demonstrated how to remove the rope with the pull of a finished knot.
That's pretty clever. Must be 20 feet of rope here.
Abira nodded and moved to the inner bull pit to choose her weaponry. A nearly 6-foot-long curved blade made of heavy but razor-sharp metal. Surprisingly balanced, even though it was as easy as long as she was tall. Birx picked a small but sturdy crossbow that only carried 3 bolts and a weighted metal club. After the two signaled they were ready, the pigman called up to the box and the metal gate to the arena slid open. The first thing that hit them was the loud roar of the crowd. Many of them in person, but just as many or more were floating avatars surrounding the arena. Abira and Birx had donned traditional Kalashan masks to hide their identities and stood in the center of the ring as 2 chained beasts snarled at them from the other side. Lion-headed, gigantic humanoids, grown in much the same way as a microwave, perversions of nature, made for the sole purpose of the arena. The countdown began.
5, 4, 3, 2.
She's absolutely perfect. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
My name's Daphne, and I'm not little.
Diamond Eyes. And the fight is underway. Both the Abominus springing into action. One of them claws at the face of the Kalashan, Ashika. And it looks like Ashika is at least as agile as a Kalashan. She makes dodging those claws look easy.
The bigger one, Koha, he's looking pretty ordinary out there right now. He's already on his back. Yeah, he's being shredded. He appears to be avoiding any death blows, but...
Koa fires a crossbow bolt, hitting the Abominus center mass and
Oof. Right through the heart.
Koa's speed and overwhelming violence as he drops that steel club onto the skull of the Abominus, and it's not looking good.
Those wild movements are just death throes, Schlemp. That kind of damage to the brain would put down anyone.
Birx huffed and wheezed as he took the club from the abominous skull and pounded it into the sand upright, using it as something to lean on as he watched. Abira and the abominous were taking turns swiping deadly attacks at each other while simultaneously moving to avoid their opponents. With ears pinned back and eyes shining, the abominous watched Birx struggle to walk toward him as he held his bloodied side. He collapsed to one knee and coughed.
When it comes at me, take the shot.
Before Abira could muster a response, the apex predator was leaping through the air at Birx, who simultaneously stood up fully from his crouched position and tried to counterattack with the club before he crumpled to the fetal position under the weight of the beast. The crowd was already reacting with cheers dripping with bloodlust before Birx even noticed Abira had cut the abominous clean in half. Birx slid out of the way of the business end of the dead abominous as it landed and slid a ways in the sand before coming to a rest. The ferocity of this great beast's maw was only betrayed by the odd look of relief in its eyes. Birx couldn't take his own eyes off it as Abira rushed to his side to check the extent of the damage. She realized his ruse at the same time as the crowd.
He faked it, Schlemp! It was a trap!
Yes, and you can see there's no visible damage to Koa. A brilliant move to use the beast's natural prey instinct.
This fat one has some great instincts and some steely nerves that allow him to act at the perfect moment. But I'm still not convinced he's Kalashan.
The radio was drowned out by the croaking of Talek as he listened to the calling of the preliminary round. Mikey, Daphne, Grell, and Lawless all stood at the foot of Talek's personal skybox that overlooked the arena. It was the height of lavishness to a delusion, outfitted to look like the swampy archipelago planet they were from. Waterworks and exotic tropical plants included.
Nice touch trying to pass off that as a Kalashan assassin. Where did you even find such a specimen of middle-aged humanoid?
He was a little last minute, but it looks like he's holding his own.
That fat old man is a scary motherfucker when he needs to be. I've seen him do some crazy shit, but he usually complains about his back for weeks after.
You know, everyone can hear you, right?
Yeah, but I mean, come on.
Even your newfound allies have their doubts. Yet you put your life in his hands.
Maybe I just figured it was better to take my chances up here than down there.
Yes, a clever last-minute substitute, I might add. Cowardly though it may be, I can see how you've survived this long. I shall take great pleasure in extinguishing you, Isaac Offanov.
You haven't won yet, Talek, my old friend.
Shh. Something's happening.
Birx took a deep breath and kneeled down, pulling back the crossbow as he reloaded it. Abira stood beside him in the center of the arena with her eyes closed, flickering occasionally as she stood bolt upright, clutching the giant curved blade in both hands. Birx stole a glance and took note of her intense grip. He paused a moment and readjusted his clothing before taking one more long, deep breath to center himself. The droning of the announcers mixed with the roar of the crowd faded to him as he closed his eyes and tried to focus on his own heartbeat. Soon the scraping metal sound of the opposing fighter's gate being raised joined the cacophony, and both Birx and Abira opened their eyes to see a mountain of muscle, vaguely shaped into a humanoid form. 8 feet tall with a massive mustache and a neon-colored sombrero atop his head. He leaned forward and flexed, and Birx swore he was going to pop like a balloon.
Yeah, amigo, take a look at these guns. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen, the king of the ring himself, the undisputed champion, Senior Machismo. All 490 pounds of solid muscle. He's currently 14-0 in his championship run, and he has certainly proven he deserves his accolades.
Many of his fights have been against great fighters that are on the back half of their careers. No one has been able to truly take him to the limit.
Look at the size of him. How the hell does that guy even wipe his ass?
Why do you ask such a disgusting question?
Just trying to keep the mood light.
As the walking muscle mass strutted around to the crowd's approval, a hush fell over the arena that was so sudden and complete that it almost made Birx feel dizzy. He squinted his eyes and witnessed an elderly man step out of the shadows. Slowly and deliberately, the old man stood straight as his eyes fixated in front of him, spindly fingers fidgeting with his white beard. The crowd erupted as the announcers called his name, and through the roar, Birx could barely hear a birra.
Maybe like a stick with a wet sponge on it?
What?
I mean, you asked me how that guy wiped his ass.
Birx's eyes left his opponents as he looked over at a birra for a long while. She wasn't looking directly at him, but after a moment, an awry smile cracked on her porcelain face, and she gave him a side eye before they both laughed out loud.
I did. Fair enough.
Just trying to keep the mood light.
The lumbering mountain of muscle began menacingly toward the center of the ring, with the old man following behind slowly. And with counted and precise steps, his one arm folded behind his back and the other hand still twiddling his beard. His eyes were cold and gray, focused but not focused, an air of death about him. Birx was the first to notice the old man's aura, but switched his gaze to the massive wrestler instead.
I'll handle the big one. You could take the old man, but I got a bad feeling about him. Be careful.
Abira nodded and moved cautiously to face Fixio, who bowed slowly and stood straight as he beheld her.
We are not clashing.
I am aware, and judging by your heartbeat, you're synthetic as well. I'm eager to see how far technology has come.
Fixico and Ashika are sizing each other up. No surprise there, as they look like the more capable of the four fighters.
Yes, and they also appear to be yapping at each other. I sure wish we could hear what they were saying, Schlemp.
The massive Senior Machismo stood flexing for his fans, seemingly unbothered by his opponent as he turned his back to Birx. As soon as he did, though, Birx launched the massive steel club at the back of the champion's head at the first sign of the opening, and landed a direct hit with near full force. Machismo's head barely moved as his chest began to heave with huge angered breaths. Birx's eyes widened in disbelief as he tried to pull back for another attack, only to have the club yanked from his grasp like he was a child. As soon as the wrestler turned, Birx shot a crossbow bolt at his face, only to have the champ raise his hand at the last second and catch it. Well, more accurately, he let the bolt sink into the palm of his hand and grinned as a murderous aura emanated from him.
You think you're gonna take me out with that puny little weapon? You got another thing coming, brother.
Machismo launched towards Birx with stunning speed for his size, drilling a massive fist into his stomach that doubled the old detective over. Blood immediately erupted from Birx's mouth, and before he could even breathe, the wrestler's gigantic hand clamped down on his head and lifted him to eye level. Birx dangled lifelessly as the wrestler laughed and tossed him against the electrified cage nearly 30 feet away, as if he were tossing a toy. The detective slammed into the cage and shuddered violently as the electricity seized his body for a few seconds. Smoke billowed from his clothing as he slid down the cage and slumped forward. Abira caught sight of this and tried to move to help Birx, but a blinding blur of movement from Fixico stopped her. He stood before her, throwing a punch, and looked almost feeble until it connected. She barely blocked the attack, but was still knocked back. Feet planted as they slid through the sand of the arena. She came to a stop and gritted her teeth as her eyes bored holes into the old man. Machismo turned to face Abira and stalked toward her, leaving the lifeless Birx slumped over.
Looks like the iron body of Senor Machismo was too much for Koha to handle. If he's still alive, I think his corner man will be popping that flare any moment now.
If it was any other fighter, I'd say that's a safe bet. But remember, Mork, Kalashan don't surrender under any circumstances, and Koa does seem to be stirring.
Abira readied the long curved blade and began slashing with devastating speed at Fixico, who seemed to effortlessly dodge each of her swings with impeccable footwork. In spite of the intensity of Abira's attacks, Fixico was still standing directly in front of her. Abira raised the blade over her head with both hands and brought the blade down in a ferocious slash. Fixico simply stepped back a single step and struck the blade with the ridge of his hand, snapping the blade in half as it spun and struck into the sand in front of Senor Machismo. Birx slowly released the rope from his clothing and tied one of the sais he had been given to one end of it, dousing the silk rope in lighter fluid from his cigar lighter. Crawling forward as quietly as he could while the wrestler was distracted, he whistled loudly once he got into throwing range.
Hey, asshole, you forgot to finish me off.
Machismo whipped around to face Birx as he just stood up and lit the rope into a blaze, throwing the hand scythe between his legs. Yanking it upward, it stuck directly in his groin, and the wrestler let out a stone-shattering howl. Birx then threw the flaming rope into the champ's face, pulling one of his throwing knives as he ran forward and slid face first at the hulking behemoth's right leg. Before the man could react, Birx jammed the knife into his Achilles tendon and the lumbering giant reeled backward, landing flat onto his back. As soon as he landed, the broken blade poked out of his chest. Still moving, he managed to get the rope off of him, tossing it aside, only to see the blade sticking through him. He began to panic and reached into his wrestling trunk, pulling and popping a surrender flare. Birx sat up on his knees and huffed and puffed as the sand stuck to his clothes and blood caked up around his nose and mouth. Medical bots swarmed the heavily bleeding Senor Machismo, eventually lifting him and flying off. Abira desperately threw her laser knives at Fixico, each one zapping as they landed with lightning speed into the sand of the arena. No matter what she tried to throw at the old man, it was like fighting a ghost. Birx quietly loaded the last of his crossbow bolts into the launcher as he struggled to maintain consciousness.
Your speed is impressive, but your body betrays your movements before you make them.
Abira swung with all her might at the old man who seemed to slip between her offense like a sheet of silk in the wind. This continued on for a long moment without either of the fighters taking any real damage. Birx let the last bolt fly just as Fixico dodged a blinding fast punch from Abira. It seemed like a sure thing until Fixico spun around and effortlessly caught the bolt between his two fingers and tossed it back at Birx in one fluid motion. The movement was so quick that Birx didn't even see the projectile sticking from his chest before he fell over unconscious on the arena floor, this time completely motionless.
It looks like Fixico's age might be catching up to him. Ashika just keeps getting faster and faster. I can hardly see their movements at all.
Yes, Mork, an absolutely inhuman onslaught is being witnessed here today. How does she continue so tirelessly?
Wait a minute. Fixico caught her by the arm. He's broken it. Whew. What a gruesome display.
Hold on, Carnage fans! Are those sparks flying from the broken arm of Ashika? What kind of Kalashan is this, ladies and gentlemen?
All hell was breaking loose in the skybox as the fight hurtled toward its conclusion. Daphne was inconsolable as she tried her best to scream through the crowd in vain.
Papa, get up! Papa! Papa!
An android? So, now your plot is uncovered off and of. Seize them.
Lawless was joined by a group of Delusians barging through the door and wrestling all of the inhabitants aside from Talik to the ground. Daphne swung wildly at the attackers, kicking one before she too was wrestled to the ground.
Papa! Papa!
I had no idea she was an android, Talik. You gotta believe me. Talik, take them. I'm innocent.
What the fuck? This was all your idea, you fucking slimy son of a bitch.
Lawless slammed Isaac's head into the wall as he held him captive, and Talik spoke loudly over the commotion as he stood up from his seat and turned to the group. Grell's eye caught the white flare that went up in the arena right after he turned, but Talik didn't seem to notice. Talik's skin turned bright red color as he fumed and stomped around, trying to think of the best way to take his revenge on these people for trying to trick him.
Kill the child first. Your first act of punishment would be to watch this android perish.
In the arena, the roar of the crowd turned to an ear-shattering cacophony of boos and jeers as Fixico stood with his arm raised, the trigger mechanism of the submission flare still in his hand.
The jig is up, and an old man has nothing else to prove. The time of the Kalash is ending. The rise of the machines was always an inevitability, one I must submit to.
Abira wasn't satisfied. She rushed toward Fixico once more, her broken, sparking arm dangling behind her as she closed in, only to have Fixico drop a smoke bomb and disappear like the wind. She roared in frustration, but darted straight to Birx and kneeled in front of him, putting an ear to his broken and battered face to see if he was still breathing. Her lip began to quiver, and she pounded on his chest softly, watching for any sign of movement. When it didn't come, tears began to pour down her cheeks.
Daniel, wake up. You can't die here, Daniel. Get up.
Medical droids began to swarm the lifeless Birx and quickly went to work removing the projectile and cauterizing the wound. Abira sat over him in shock, wiping the tears from his face as they dropped on him. The corners of Birx's mouth quivered into a smile and he spoke shakily, just one phrase before his head fell to the side.
Warm tears. For me?
Abira began to sob uncontrollably as the medical bot stretched Birx and took him away. But where? She had no idea. She was paralyzed. In her own mind, she could hear Daphne screaming and sobbing with her, and it nearly broke her. It sounded too real. It only took a moment for her to realize it was real. Her android ears were picking up the sound from the skybox. Rage like she had never felt before coursed through her body, and she tore off in the direction of the little girl. She busted through the door to the skybox and jetted toward Talik, but Lawless stood in the way with a blaster trained on her. She moved with such blinding speed and aggression that even Lawless couldn't keep up with her. She kicked the weapon from his hand and the giant salamander grabbed her by the waist with his massive arms, as the other Delusian struggled to get a good shot on her. Using the distraction to his advantage, Offenoff slithered out the door before anyone could catch him. Mikey and Grell also used the distraction to tackle their captors. All hell broke loose as blaster fire shot off in wild directions as everyone fought to gain control of him. Lawless felt his arms getting moved in spite of the fact he was trying his hardest to hold on to Abira. She had enough of the charade though. as she spotted Talik trying to slither away over the side of the skybox. One quick movement from the titanium alloy frame of the android, and Rawless screamed in agony as she slowly snapped his forearm. He dropped her immediately and she ran to the edge of the skybox, planting a laser knife deep into the webbed hand of Talik to keep him dangling from it.
I told you already, you slimy little shit. I will have that ship one way or another. Now, you are going to tell me where those bots took my friend, and we are boarding that ship. Understood?
Ivanov lost that ship over a decade ago. It's probably been bought and sold 5 times by now. Your friend is in the infirmary next door. Just let me go.
Not good enough. I won. And you are going to give me a ship.
Vera thrust another laser knife into Talik's forearm, further pinning him to the side of the skybox as he howled and croaked in pain.
Yes, fine. You win. Rawless, give her the command chip for the Proteus now.
Rawless eyed Abira and slowly took his good hand from the mangled hanging meat hook that used to be his other arm and reached in his pocket, producing the chip. Abira snatched it from him and looked around the room at the others, motioning for Grell to hand her the blaster. He complied silently, and Abira wasted no time shooting each of the delusions between the eyes, stopping as she trained the barrel on Rawless.
You are not stupid enough to follow us, are you?
As long as my master lives, I obey.
Without a second thought, Abira leaned over the balcony and ended Talik in the same way she had dispatched his crony.
You are the master now, so tell me I don't have to look over my shoulder for you in the future.
Go, before the authority comes. The ship is docked behind the casino.
Abira, Grell, Daphne, and Mikey all beat a hasty retreat and retrieved the lifeless body of Birx as he barely hung on. Grell took the command chip for the Proteus and ushered the rest of the crew on board as Abira frantically looked out the cockpit's bay windows.
There! We are not too late. Follow the Varangian before he wormhole back to the Milky Way.
This thing's a little too advanced. I've got no idea what I'm doing.
I'll handle that.
Vera looked at Off with disgust as he somehow managed to show up at the perfect time as usual. Now she was sure she didn't trust him, but she didn't have much of an option either.
Fine. But if you try to screw us over, I promise, it will not end well for you.
Relax. All I want is to get the hell off this rust bucket. It'll be much easier to escape with the cloaking tech on this ship.
Off slid into the navigator's seat and fired up the ship in the cloaking field as if he'd been born to do so. The Proteus easily caught up with the Wraith, and as it wormholed, they followed behind. Mikey looked out the window at Radiant City as alarms blared and police vehicles swarmed the area they had just left. He didn't know exactly where they were headed, but it had to be better than here. But what about Birx? Grell and Daphne rushed him back to the infirmary on board the ship and hooked him up to the machines to keep his heart pumping. As the gang hurdles through time and space, headed back to the Milky Way, they leave behind them a trail of destruction. But where would they run to once they made it back home? Hiding from Mizukawa right under his nose was a ballsy move. But would it be the right one? Find out next time on the series finale of Hardwire Heartache. The end.